Someone would talk that's why they but that's why I'm hoping that then
Yeah, that'll look good. Thanks, guys.
but we did lose to Montana and they were like so we would be in that and something for sure.
But now it's a little bit.
I think it could be LCS.
We'll see. We're all looking for next year. So then we can start with it. We'll make it solid.
Okay,
Please talk.
good morning. Let's get started. So this is our final week of the term. This is our final Monday class meeting. So welcome back. We're here at the home stretch, and we'll be going over some final things in our last few class meetings. The last couple things that we'll be talking about in the class for today are interpersonal communication in the workplace. Workplace communication is something, of course, that we all have to do or have already been doing. In fact, as we talked about in the very beginning of the term, skills such as communication, writing skills, the ability to work in teams, all of those things connected to communication are foundational things that employers want to look for. So tools for living and ways to help us engage and understand this material. So we'll be getting into that for today. And then on Wednesday, we'll be looking at what's called the dark side of interpersonal communication, the patterns, behaviors, and practices that we might consider to be disrespectful, hurtful, or damaging. It's kind of a dour note to end on, but I do think it's a useful way for us to apply and look at some of these issues in practice. So we've got a practice question today that connects to some of the things we talked about last week in looking at family relationships and sibling relationships. So a blank sibling relationship has both high hostility and high warmth. Either A, hostile, B, protective, C, harmonious, or D, affect intense. I'll give you a minute or two on this one, and we'll talk about it together.
They were like, no, we're the person who can do it. And they're like, well, okay, that's fine. I don't know. But it was the next thing I knew. I'll be able to feel it like I said, and I was like,
Okay. Is there anybody who would like some more time on this question? Okay, let's talk about it together. How many people say A, hostile, B, protective, C, harmonious, D, affect intense? How many people are unsure? Okay. Best answer here is D, affect intense. So we used a 2x2 to describe sibling relationships. Sibling relationships are characterized both by warmth and hostility. So a sibling relationship that's warm but not hostile is considered harmonious and get along. There are disengaged sibling relationships with both low warmth and low hostility. Hostile has high hostility but low warmth. And affect intense, you can think about as a sibling with whom you fight and you argue a whole lot. You get into a lot of disagreement, but you still love them and you still care about them, right? So there's strong feelings in either direction. You feel intense affect or emotional response to that sibling, whether it's positive or negative. So I recommend reviewing some of that stuff about sibling and family relationships that'll be on the final exam. Also, I know that we had a number of folks who couldn't attend last week. So we had a practice short essay question for Friday's class. We also have 2 practice short essay questions on the exam review, which is on Canvas. So I encourage you, if you missed last Friday, to take a look at that practice short essay question. You might even practice doing it for yourself to help to prepare and assess how you're doing in getting ready for that exam. You don't have to write this or work on this for today, but just for your reference, this was the practice question that is also available on the slides for last Friday. So you're welcome to use that to help yourself to study and prepare, or you could choose to take it again or request feedback from me on this practice question if you would like. So to give you a sense of the remaining class meetings, we have today's class, interpersonal communication in the workplace, negative or dark side of communication on Wednesday. One note that I want to give is that I know a lot of people are traveling and have other things going on Friday. So Friday's class is optional. It's just like the day before the midterm where we had an optional review day. So just like last time, you're welcome to come in if you'd like some help preparing for the final exam. We'll be talking about some things to know in preparation for that. Also note that there's one last Canvas prompt that's due this Sunday. So please get that in if you still are in need of doing so. Final exam again is between December 12th and December 14th. And then all of the remaining assignments need to be in by the 14th. That is the end of the term and when I need to submit grades. So that is the hard cutoff for remaining assignments. For today, we're going to be looking at interpersonal communication in the workplace, some examples, and why this stuff matters. Again, not only is it one of the most important and marketable skills, but understanding the ways that communication in the workplace has changed, understanding the experiences and frustration that we might encounter in the workplace. Those issues are all on the table for us to be looking at in greater detail. I do want to give a few reminders. So all of the grades in this course are updated. So all of the Canvas prompts, attendance, and your essay have been graded. So what I encourage you to do is take a look at your attendance records. And again, if you have missed more than 3 class meetings, then I encourage you between now and the end of the term to complete makeup assignments for those days that you've missed, because any days past those 3 are entered as zeros until they're filled in with the makeup assignments. So I encourage you between now and December 14th to do that. And again, the link to that makeup assignment is right on the front page of Canvas and is asking you to use the slides and videos from that day to catch up. Again, that Canvas prompt, final one's on Sunday. So if you're not feeling great about your scores on the prompt so far, you're welcome to do that one, and that will drop your lowest scores if you've submitted more than 6. And then this Wednesday at 1 p.m. is a meeting with Oregon Rural Action. So as soon as the college gives me the room for that, I will email you where that room is located. And also a Zoom link if you'd like to attend remotely. It'll be from 1 to 2:50 on Wednesday. And if you can't attend, there'll be a recording and you'll be able to use that recording in order to do that extra credit opportunity as well. And again, the extra credit will be due on the 14th. It'll add 20 points or 2% on, totally optional, but your choice is whether or not to do that. Before we get started on the new stuff for today, any questions, anything from last class or anything in general as we head into the home stretch? Great. I appreciate all of your hard work, your engagement so far. I know that we've had a whole lot of fun to navigate with some of the winter weather. I know that for many of you in your first year, there's been a whole lot to try to navigate and juggle, but I really appreciate your diligence and sticking with it, right? The best way to do well in the class at this stage is just to continue to work on those final assignments and to prepare for that final exam, right? So I really encourage you to do well in that final push in order to wrap up on a high. So it should probably come as no surprise that we spend a lot of our time in life with work. In fact, in an average day, right, individuals who are employed spend about 9 hours on work or work-related activities, which we think about kind of corresponds to a 9 to 5 or 8 to 5 type of schedule. And that's a huge chunk of our lives. One of the things that we've noticed is in the past 2.5 years of COVID-19, we have seen a significant shift toward more jobs that are offered either completely remotely or have a remote component, right? And one of the things that to notice is that while that reduces something like a commute time, a lot of people have reported that through doing remote work or online courses, that's a lot harder to compartmentalize, right? There's a good chance you have to take classes online, that there's something that felt kind of icky or weird about using something like a home space for completing classes, or maybe that meant that things were slushing into weekends or time earlier or later in ways that they didn't normally do. So one of the challenges that we've seen as a result of the shift to remote and online is the ways that a time or schedule is allocated, right? How people manage and use their time, and so on. So there's a lot of wiggle room here in terms of how we define and situate work. All that to say, it should come as no surprise that work is a big part of many people's lives and many of the interactions that people form, right? There's a good reason that a lot of the most popular shows and films are ones that situate and talk about workplace experiences. Again, things like The Office or Parks and Rec are great examples here about how the workplace becomes such a center of our communication. So our communication at work has changed in a lot of different ways. Again, one of the biggest areas here is the inclusion of remote work. And what that's meant has been an uptick in the use of things such as email, Zoom, Google Hangouts, and other styles of meetings, right? So that's a double-edged sword. One of the first things that we talked about in this quarter, right, was the idea that so much of our communication happens non-verbally, happens through facial expressions, tone of voice, all of that good stuff. And a lot of that gets lost when we shift remotely. If you're sending an email, right, all you have is the text. The text can be interpreted really differently depending upon somebody's emotional state and experience. Sometimes you're intending to be very professional, but maybe somebody reads the email in a way that's passive aggressive or thinks that you're being disrespectful, right? Or there's a greater priority put on being able to develop a professional email, right? Using a greeting, using a subject line, using a signature, and so on. We also know, of course, you might be sick of Zoom or Google Hangouts or something similar from doing that for classes, but there has been developed norms and understanding of how people use that properly, right? We're well past the age where people are talking while they're muted, right? Or showing up in a really unprofessional way through video. There's an expectation in a lot of jobs that include a remote or online component that people are able to competently or effectively communicate using those resources, that they know how to navigate something like the chat or screen sharing on Zoom. They know how to present themselves in a professional way and so on. Again, there was a good meme going around that was people who were dressing up as they did for Zoom, and they had, nice clothes on the front half, and then they were wearing pajama pants, which is fine, is just an example of how we might present ourselves online and think about that presentation, knowing that there's greater norms and expectations for doing so. Less engagement that's happening face-to-face, office spaces, and so on, right? Again, the inclusion of more flexible hours and spaces mean that while there are opportunities in the workplace, especially if you're doing kind of very applied on the ground work, you're probably actively working with people, but there is net less of that engagement. Because even after the worst effects of COVID, a lot of people have realized that there are jobs that can be moved in that remote way. But I think one thing that's especially interesting is the idea that a lot of our personal lives and experiences can feel a little bit more exposed. When I was teaching courses that were purely remote under COVID, one of the things that I thought was important was to not require cameras on, because if you're in your personal and home space, sometimes that feels invasive for that to be shown to other people, right? So one challenge that we have is what we're choosing to reveal about our personal or home lives through the use of workspaces. And again, a lot more communication that's happening online, happening through email, happening through like text or Discord or Slack or something similar, leads to greater risk of communication ambiguity. If you updated your iOS, you have something like an iPhone, right? There's a whole new round of emojis. There's like a melting face emoji that's been really popular. among Gen Z folks, there's less understanding about how these new forms of communication and messaging might be understood by other people. Send that emoji and somebody doesn't get it, or they haven't upgraded, so it shows up as a question mark. There's greater changes to our online communication that impact how we understand each other. And more flexibility in styles and methods of communication too. I think that there is a greater emphasis on understanding that depending on culture and lived experience, the ways that we communicate might look really different. All that to say, right, communication is always changing. How we understand communication is a process of understanding over time through resources, through all of those things that how communication plays out in these settings is going to look really different than it did 20 years ago. So this connects to this idea of what's considered to be both profession and professionalism. And especially over the past few years, I think that the term professionalism, or what it means to be professional, has been rightly challenged and critiqued to some degree, right? What does it mean to be professional? For who? What does that look like? A lot of my research and background is on understanding the experience of people with disabilities, right? And one of the ways that we can understand that is the idea of time, how time is used, how time is allocated, looks really different. If you're asked to go to a meeting at 9 a.m. And you're navigating a space in which, maybe there isn't, safe conditions on the sidewalks, they haven't been shoveled, maybe there isn't access to an elevator, or the elevator is all the way across the room. Maybe the process of getting up and getting ready, putting on your clothes, all of that takes a lot longer, right? So to be professional in that context requires a significant amount of work compared to somebody that's able-bodied. So professionalism and what it means to be professional is not something that's experienced equally to everybody. You could grow up in an environment in which the expectations and behavior about what's professional or the cultural norms are not as readily understood or practiced by other people, such that when you are in that space, you have a lot more of a burden to learn that material. So all that to say, the idea of what professionalism is or means is something that, again, like communication, is always changing. So profession, right, is a job or occupation that requires an understanding of complex knowledge, skills, or training, education, or practical experience. Again, that can look like a whole different thing, set of things. My stepbrother is involved in construction work in the Seattle area, right, and his profession is really focused on that type of really practical on-the-ground work. I know nothing about construction. I would be horrible at it, but his expertise and background, I think, really speak to the range of ways that a profession can be understood, right? Profession is not what somebody would consider to be a white collar or office job in every context. It's something that you bring expertise and experience in. Again, a lot of our clubs and programs here at UU, such as Agripreneur, are really focused on that professional development. And professionalism refers to the traits or behaviors that constitute being appropriate for that communication context, right? Depending on the work or setting that you're involved in, what those norms and standards are going to look like will look really different. Maybe you're in a group in which using, being a little bit more craft, using more casual everyday language is okay. But maybe you're in an environment in which, like, using an office, Slack, or Discord channel to post memes would not be considered to be appropriate. So one of the challenges is figuring out what it means to engage professionally. Again, a good example of this might be sending an email, right? Requesting something like vacation time off, including a subject line, including a heading that greets and includes the name, generally including some short paragraphs and sentences that are split or separated about the main points, including a closing and a signature, right? Those general practices in a professional setting would generally be seen as something good to do, but over time, perhaps that communication becomes more casual if you're engaging with somebody that you know better and that you're more familiar with. Again, if you're a fan of The Office or of similar shows and examples here, a lot of the humor of something like an Office sitcom or show, again, there's a lot of other examples, Superstore comes to mind as well, are examples here of unethical communication. A lot of the humor, right, and the cringe comedy comes from characters who are not great bosses or not behaving in the ways that they should. We laugh because perhaps to some extent we relate to that experience, but we also just imagine, oh, this is just the worst. So unethical communication in the workplace looks like a few different things. One of them is coercive communication, where you're trying to manipulate somebody, right? So for instance, maybe you're working on a project and you say, hey, can you get this done? I've got to go, right? And you throw the project onto them to complete and coerce them to finish it, right? Or maybe you're a boss that says, you need to do this, right? So coercive communication is using power, oftentimes with regards to the responsibilities involved to hurt other people. Destructive communication would be actively choosing to hurt other people, right? It would be verbally berating or hurting somebody else. It would be saying things like, you know, you don't deserve to be here, using language that would be really destructive and hurtful. Deceptive language would be intentionally misleading to other people. So deceptive language might be saying, oh yeah, we can get this done on time, and then not completing whatever project or assignment needs to be done. Intrusive language. So this is a really important one in a lot of contexts of people applying for jobs and other positions. There are a lot of settings in the workplace and in the job interview process in which people are asked questions that are illegal. Asking something like pregnancy status and whether or not somebody has kids, right? In most contexts, that is not a legal question to ask. So language that is intrusive, that is asking about personal details, things about somebody's life that are simply not things that should be shared, asking about somebody's sexual orientation in a professional context like that. That type of work is not only intrusive and hurtful, but in many situations, it's not considered legal. Secretive language, right, is intentionally concealing or hiding something. One context that we've seen this discussed a lot has been for wages and salary. For example, a lot of actors and performers might not be paid the same despite occupying very similar or even starring roles. And there's been an increasing norm of disclosing how much people are paid for trying to have better quality in the distribution of payment. And then exploitative would be communication that's designed to expose or reveal things about other people, like saying, well, I know what this person is really doing, right? They've been hiding whiskey in their office cabinet, right? That would be an example of exploiting and exposing others through communication. So all this to say, and we'll be getting more into the destructive patterns of communication on Wednesday, that there are a lot of challenging and toxic behaviors that happen in workplace communication. So the idea of ethical communication, trying to be right and just in the way that we communicate, becomes especially important as we think about communication in those professional ways. Some other examples here of unethical language, I'm going to show a video here in just a minute that gets into this, include the idea of a microaggression, right? A microaggression is essentially death by 1,000 cuts. It's language that is targeted specifically on the basis of stereotypes about somebody's identity and experience. And the accumulation of that type of language, right? It's not that any one instance is hurtful, but the accumulation of those things day to day really begins to wear somebody down, right? Making the assumption that somebody is a nurse on the basis of their gender, making an assumption on the basis of somebody's physical appearance that they don't speak English, making an assumption that somebody is not from America, right, because they're a person of color. All of those would be examples here of microaggressions that could be used to hurt other people. The use of bias or favoritism, right, is also a really big challenge. Thinking about how language might be biased toward people, right? So, for example, using the term chairman or fireman versus chair or firefighter, we've seen a shift toward more of that neutral language, recognizing that women oftentimes occupy these roles as well. The use of language that is racist or sexist, you know, that type of language can be really hurtful and destructive. And then ethnocentrism. Again, ethnocentrism refers to the belief somebody's own culture or experience is better than somebody else's culture. And this plays out in a lot of professional ways in which people might find that the way that they do tasks or communicate about issues might look really different. So for instance, maybe people are having lunch and somebody's saying, oh, well, why aren't you having a burger, right? That'd be an example here of ethnocentrism. So I wanted to share a video that gets into kind of an understanding a bit more about the use of microaggressions and why they can be an incredibly harmful element of our communication.
People who still don't think that microaggressions are a problem. Oh, you're so well spoken. Just imagine, instead of being a stupid comment, a microaggression is a mosquito bite. Ugh, it's a compliment. Mosquito bites and their itch are one of nature's most annoying features. But if you're only bitten every once in a while, where are you really from?
Cleveland.
Sure, it's annoying, but it's not that big a deal. The problem is that some people get bitten by mosquitoes a lot more than other people. I mean, a lot more. Whether it's on a date.
Oh, your English is so good.
Excuse me, going grocery shopping. Everything happens for a reason. Commuting to work,
So when you have a baby,
watching TV. Or just walking down the street with your partner. Mosquitoes seem to pop up every year. And getting bit by mosquitoes every goddamn day, multiple times a day.
So an example here of the ways that people express and experience frustration with regard to the use of microaggressions, right? So again, the use of specifically targeted language that's making stereotypes or assumptions about somebody's identity or status, and using that as a base of making a claim about other people, be an example of these as well. So when it comes to effective intercultural communication at work, right, there's a variety of strategies that we can do. One of them is about recognizing and observing biases that we encounter. Oftentimes, we might make a biased assumption without even thinking about it or intending to be harmful for other people. For instance, we might see somebody's name on an application, make an assumption about their gender or race on the basis of that. In fact, studies have looked at the use of resumes where the information is the exact same. The only difference is how people might code gender or race. Have noticed that bias has impacted how people would evaluate those applicants. Staying open and empathetic, right? The idea of taking on other people's positions, being in other people's shoes, perhaps trading responsibilities or trying to understand what somebody else is doing is an important way in which we can practice effective intercultural communication. Curiosity, right? The idea of being willing to understand and engage with the perspectives of others, being open is important. Trying to fix every problem. So sometimes, right, we're not in the best position to fix an issue. Sometimes it means recognizing that a responsibility or issue is on somebody else's plate. And then collaborating, right? Working together within a group through team tasks are an important way that group communication can be effective too. When there's harmful or negative situations in the workplace, one way of dealing with them is what's known as the error method, where you offer empathy, responsibility, reason, and reassurance. Say, for example, that you have a coworker and the coworker feels frustrated because time and time again, they're never being considered for a promotion, despite being really hard workers. You might practice empathy and say, yeah, that's awful. I know how hard you work, and I really am frustrated that you don't seem to be recognized for your work. Responsibility, maybe saying, hey, maybe there's more that I can do to promote and to support you in your work. Reason, right? Saying that, I think that sometimes your work goes unrecognized, people just don't pay attention to it, but I would really like to provide you with greater support and offering reassurance, right? Supporting and helping that person and saying, you know what, I'm going to talk to our boss and see how I can put in a good word for you, right? So oftentimes when people are encountering challenges at work, it's not just about supporting and recognizing the challenges, but developing a plan of action that can support them in their strategies going forward. Right? So the error method is a good way of thinking about how we can better address those issues. So we have a couple models that help us to understand both how leaders behave as well as how followers behave within a group. One of them is what's called the situational leadership model. Good thing to know for your final exam. The situational leadership model suggests how leaders behave, either in terms of how much they're directing people within the group, or how much they're supporting people within the group, right? So directing would be guiding tasks and responsibilities that members of the group would have. Supporting would be to offer resources, help, and assistance that assist people in the work that they would be doing, right? So up here at the top left, we have what's considered to be supporting. That is, there's less directive, but there's a high degree of support needs. In those settings, oftentimes people in a group have the chance to do their own project. Maybe you're tasked with trying to create a flyer for a holiday party. In that situation, you're given a general goal, but how you choose to do that and create that flyer is generally up to you, but you're given support. Maybe your boss helps you to get like Adobe or Photoshop or something similar that you can use in order to effectively complete that assignment, right? That would be supporting, where the employer is more available as a resource. A high amount of direction and a high amount of support is coaching. And if you're involved in athletics, that is a really good example where they're directing you in terms of what to do, how to make a play, but they also want to support you in effectively making that happen. They're very present and very involved. Delegating is low directive and low support. Delegating essentially amounts to, here's this task, go make this poster for the holiday party, and essentially leaves you to do that without really offering you much direction or support, but not micromanaging you either. And then in a more directing style, you have low support, but high directive, right? That would be very micromanaging. I want you to develop this poster, and this poster needs to have X, Y, Z, it needs to be in this font, it needs to include this image, and so on. Directing is oftentimes used in a leadership situation where the leader really needs something to happen in a certain way and wants you to achieve a very specific goal for various reasons. So the directing style is here on the bottom. These change depending on the type and nature of a leader in a group or organization. They also change depending upon the situation, right? Maybe making a poster is not high stakes, but coaching before a big game does require a little bit more direction. We also have what is known as leader-manager exchange theory. Again, a useful theory to know going into your final exam. And this deals with the idea that over time, as we develop relationships with people that we work with, the barriers and role of power diminish. We might think about cultural measures of difference earlier in the term, particularly the idea of power distance, referring to the degree of communication that happens across people with different levels of power. Over time, it's said that we move from a stranger to more acquaintance and more of a partner stage, right? And in the stranger stage, this is this very initial, perhaps you've just gotten a new job, maybe you're working for a radio station, right? At this early stage, you're beginning to create a partnership with, the producers of that radio station. You're starting to establish those immediate roles. You have very specific one-to-one communication with them. Generally speaking, you're really trying to follow the rules. You're trying to create a good impression. There's not a whole lot of trust. In fact, there might be turnover and concerns that you might not stick with them. You might not be a good employee, right? You feel in many ways untested. And so at this stage, you have a self-interest in proving yourself and, having this job secured. They have a self-interest in making sure that you're doing the things that you need to do, right? As we move into an acquaintance stage, maybe you start to become good friends with and relate to the producers and other people that are working with you on your new radio show. At this stage, it's more acceptable for communication to not be immediate or one-to-one. Reach out to them, they'll respond to you when they can, and vice versa. There's less of an immediate need to manage that person. You have more established roles, and your trust begins to be developed. So perhaps over time, they realize that you're really good at managing audio. And so they give you a bit more responsibility to manage the audio that you use in your radio show. And then you start to develop a little bit more team interest and engagement. You start to become a part of the group and provide ideas and support in a way that you didn't before. And then again, not every workplace relationship gets to this stage, but a partnership would be considered to be an equal, right? You are just as much a part of creating and being involved in this radio show as somebody else. Your relationship is much more negotiated in that you can choose how different partners and members of the group delegate tasks. Maybe you're in charge of saying and the content of the radio show, and you're also involved with some of the parts of the audio. There's a lot of trust in this situation. You have meaningful exchanges, and rather than it just being based on doing what's best for you and keeping your job, you have a vested interest in this radio show and in working together with other people. Right, so the partner stage would be this final step here about how you're able to successfully collaborate on a variety of different issues. So a good example here about how our communication changes depending upon the level of trust and relationships we have with people in the workplace. Lastly, we have what are considered to be different styles of followership, right? So if you're an employee, you're not a leader or in charge of something, but you might make different choices about how you engage within a workplace or professional setting, which can be defined both in terms of the challenge of the tasks or issues that you're doing and the degree of support that you have from the supervisor. Here at the top left, you have an individualistic approach, right? In this situation, you are trusted and tasked with doing a lot of challenging things and doing them on your own. So if you're very independent, maybe you're working on a group project and say, you know what, I'm going to take care of slides 8 through 10. I've got this, don't worry. They might be challenging, but you are able as a member of the group to get something done. Generally speaking, you will do something more efficiently or better, even if it goes against the advice of your supervisor, because you feel that you'd rather get something done right on your own metric than to follow directions word for word. So you might say, I was supposed to do slides 8 through 10, but as I was working through that, I thought it would be good to have this extra slide for a visual, so I went ahead and put that together too. That'd be an example where you're going a little bit off script, but you're doing so because you see a way of achieving the goal. As mentioned, as a partner, you have a lot of support, but you also provide challenge to the leaders. So in that situation, right, you're actively communicating, you're pushing back. Maybe you're saying, you know what, I really don't like this topic for this radio show. Let's change it, right? So you're working very actively and supportively here. You don't challenge authority, and you don't really have much supervisory support if you're a resource. A good example of this is maybe you're working and you run into a big tech issue, and you call in a tech specialist or resource specialist who comes in and resolves the issue. Generally speaking, that person is not going to have a whole lot of supervisory support. They're in charge of dealing with an issue, but they're not being asked to directly challenge the authority or influence either. They're instead being asked to get the issue or topic dealt with. And then an implementer is somebody who receives a lot of supervisory support and somebody who doesn't really challenge authority either. So as an implementer, there's somebody that's tasked with resolving an issue. Maybe you're tasked with putting together that flyer for a Christmas party, and you follow the instructions and get the things done, right? Implementers are generally highly valued because they can accomplish challenging or specialized skills, but they don't really pose a threat or risk to the group or the supervisor because they get the thing done that needs to be done, right? So depending on the situation and context, the leadership style that you use and what's considered to be appropriate as a leadership or followership style is going to look really different. So what I'd like you to do for today's attendance is to take some time on your own, and I'd like you to think about a field that you're currently interested in. Maybe it's a career field that you're already involved in if you're a part of a club or group or you work off campus, or an area that you're interested in pursuing in the future. What would it mean to, first of all, be a professional in that field? Second of all, what does it mean to communicate ethically in that field, right? How would you be an ethical or effective communicator there? And then we've talked about microaggressions and the challenges that microaggressions can pose. How might microaggressions come up, and how might you engage with those or respond to those if they came up in the workplace? So I'll give you some time to work on this for your attendance for today. Take a couple more minutes to work on this. take another minute to finish up. As I hope you've had the chance to reflect on and think about a bit, right? What it means to be professional can be really different depending on the career, the goals, what you see yourself doing, and what it means to be effective. Oftentimes, there's a focus on what's considered efficient and what makes sense in the norms and ideals that are present in your group. Ethical communication, again, looks different, but general principles of honesty, openness, responsibility taking are things to look for. And microaggressions, again, are things that can come up in a lot of workplace contexts without necessarily or actively thinking about it, and are assumptions that we might bring to the table and continue to try to work on unlearning through our communication. So to wrap up for today, we had the chance to talk about some of the elements of communication in the workplace and the ways that these have seen changes, especially over the years with remote and virtual forms of presentation. The challenges of engaging respectfully and ethically in the workplace, and different ways in which people engage in leadership styles, organization, and structures, as well as followership style differences. All good things to know as you gear up for the final exam. On Wednesday, we'll be discussing negative patterns, destructive patterns of interpersonal communication, using that to wrap up our new content for the quarter. Once you've completed your attendance activity, please pass forward or email that to me. Have a great rest of your morning, safe travels, and I'll see you again on Wednesday.
Bye.
Bye, Zeke.